I think we're back from our discussion. Sorry to break up all those incredible discussions over lunch. It's good to feel the buzz from all those young university partnerships that are emerging. So welcome back to the afternoon session. We've got two keynote speeches before we get to the plenary session. So our first keynote is developing your research strategy, and I'm absolutely delighted to have with us Professor Koen Lamberts, who is the vice-chancellor and president of University of York in the UK. And Koen was joining that university in only January of this year, so relatively new, an experimental psychologist by background. So do you want to take us on and talk about developing your research strategy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Good afternoon. The University of York, as you've seen, featured in the top 50. The university was founded in 1963, so this year, unfortunately, it will be 51 years old. And although I've been telling Phil that 60 is the new 50, I don't think I've managed to convince him. So we'll fall out of the rankings, unfortunately. But there are still a few things that I think we can talk to you about. And although I've only been there for 4 months, it has been quite an interesting experience. And what I would like to try and do is give you a sense for how we see the university potentially developing over the next 5 to 10 years. And in doing so, I'll be focusing on research, because that's what I was asked to do. And you could safely say that that's where our plans are probably best crystallized. So the university was set up in 1963, and when it was founded, it had really quite bold principles. You know, it was designed to be a beacon of opportunity for people who would not normally go to university, and certainly not go to a top university. So that inclusivity, that commitment to opportunity was there from the start. Now, at the same time, it was also committed to rigorous quality, to excellence in everything it did, in teaching and in research. And these two founding principles, I think, are still with us, and they define what the university is about to the present day. So in less than 50 years, York has established itself in the top 10 of UK higher education institutions and among the world's best 100. There are two striking aspects of that achievement, I think. The first is that it happened so quickly, because as we heard this morning, world rankings in particular are driven by reputation. And even if you are very good, your reputation can take generations to develop. So that's the first thing that's remarkable about that kind of progress. The second is that the university has performed equally well on metrics of research as on metrics of teaching. And that's not something you could say about every highly ranked university, we think. And I will return to that fundamental connection between research and teaching later on. The university's foundations also included a very strong vision about the kind of community that was being created. And a huge amount of thought went into the social structure and the academic structures and how they should be organized to give students and faculty the opportunity to interact with each other, to interact with colleagues and other students from outside their own disciplines, and with people from different generations and different cohorts and so forth. And as a result of that think process, the university was set up as a very flexible institution with a very informal and relaxed style, but also with a real sense of drive and a very strong sense of purpose. And I think that sort of ethos, if you like, has stayed with the institution ever since, and it's certainly like that today. So it's that combination, I think, of strong focus, strong determination, and adaptability, flexibility, willingness to think differently, that these very early circumstances have created that have helped York on its way. Now, if you were to identify the single most important driver of York's success in recent years, then it would have to be excellence in research. In the UK, as many of you will know, there is a national assessment of research quality every 6 years or so. And in these exercises, the research of every department or every discipline essentially in the universities is evaluated by peer review panels. And that is a very intensive and competitive process, and it produces what you could say is the definitive league table of research quality in the UK. Now, in the last 2 assessments of research quality, York was ranked in the top 10 of British universities, which is quite a rare achievement for a young and relatively small institution. It puts us in the select company of Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL, LSE, Edinburgh, and other such established names. So if you think about it, that is actually quite a select group of top universities. There was evidence, too, of a broad range of disciplines where we were judged to be the best in the country, to have the best research in the country. And that included English, sociology, parts of health sciences, and we also performed very well in the natural sciences. So our research has been quite extraordinary in that, and has developed to great strength in that relatively short period of time. And we perform very well in a very wide range of subjects and disciplines, going all the way from the discovery of new enzymes to break down cellulose, to on the other end, on the other extreme, changing social policy at the national level. So we span a broad range of subjects and disciplines. We are a genuine, comprehensive research university. So that's one element of York's reputation. Now let's turn to that other very important thing that we do, teaching. In the early 1990s, the British government introduced a system of measuring the quality of teaching in universities. And every academic discipline in every university in the country was rigorously inspected, and the results of those inspections were published over a period of time. And as they emerged, there was one university that really stood out, and that was York. York came top of the teaching quality rankings in the UK, ahead of Oxford, ahead of Cambridge, ahead of the teaching-focused old polytechnics, which had just become universities, ahead of everybody else. So York achieved this partly by insisting, and we still do that today, that our very best researchers also teach students at all levels, from the first year undergraduate on right to PhD students. And we believe that that creates a very special dynamic, and it gives a coherence to academic activity, which we think works incredibly well. So at York, we define our educational offer. We define what the students can expect there in terms of what they will learn about research, how they will be inspired by research-led, research-driven teaching. And we engage them in research from the start. So many of our undergraduates undertake projects as part of their undergraduate degree. We often link international experiences to those universities where we have research links, so there is a research element to student exchange as well, and so forth. So the two, teaching and research in York, are mutually supportive. So I think the university has demonstrated that you don't have to choose whether to be excellent in research or in teaching. You can do both. And we've also demonstrated that a very young, new university can outperform, leapfrog the established order. And in fact, being young gives you some distinct advantages. We are not bound by long-established conventions and traditions that get in the way of innovation and flexibility. We are not so devolved, and rooted in structures that have been there for many, many years that we can't, invent or merge new research groups or even departments. We all operate in an environment of change. Governance in most countries in the last 20 years have had huge impacts on higher education through deliberate policy making and through consequences of policies that were perhaps not in the first instance intended to affect higher education in the way they have. So higher education has become a globalized competitive industry. And if we are to take advantage of the opportunities that arise in global higher education, and whether that is in research funding, in terms of institutional collaboration, in terms of establishing branch campuses overseas, signing agreements for mobility and so forth, our internal structures have to be able to cope with these new initiatives, with these new ways of doing things. So it's not impossible, of course, to do that in an older established university, but it's certainly more difficult for the reasons that I just mentioned. So younger universities like York can more easily restructure their support services, they can invent new academic areas and departments, and they can group disciplines together when they see the need to do so. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all very easy and that you can just do this and change institutions in a fundamental way all the time without negative consequences. And there have been difficulties in York's trajectory as well, as you might expect. At some times, the university has grown so fast that the renewal of its support environment simply could not happen as quickly as it should have done. And we also know that structures that are very effective and very good in a relatively small university, in a small young university, don't always cope well with growth in size and in volume of operations. So as we've grown, one of the challenges for me and my colleagues there is how we preserve that adaptability as we grow and get older. We are, of course, much younger than Bologna and Tokyo and Sydney and Harvard or Cambridge, but we're still older than the many hundreds of universities that have been founded recently in Asia and in Africa and South America. So we've now reached a level of maturity that requires us to think very hard about how we should continue to do things. We've reached a stage, I think, where being young is no longer an excuse for not doing things in the right way. And that is actually quite an important transition to make. So we are in quite an exciting period, I think, of developing a new strategy at York that sort of acknowledges that fact. And that strategy will be centered, quite simply, on our basic tasks of research and teaching. Those two will remain at the heart of the university. Now, I will talk about our research strategy within that context. Now, undertaking high-quality research, as we have done and as we intend to continue to do, and providing the right support for it is, as you all know, quite a complex business. Much of the world's best research comes from global collaborations. There is huge competition for funds at all levels. Publication in top journals is highly competitive. So the question is what universities can do really to ensure that their researchers are producing that world-leading work that you seek from them. Now, not very long ago, I would have answered the question about what would be the best research strategy for a university. In a general sense, by just saying that you do employ the best academics, you hire the best people, and you give them freedom, time, and support to allow them to do their research in a free, uncontrolled, and as much as possible unconstrained way. Let them drive it. Now, I think there is a lot of merit in that approach, because we all know that leading academics will continue to drive research forward because that is what they do. That is what they're intrinsically motivated to deliver. However, I do think they also need the right environment, and that is, in my view, where the new context in which we have to operate has mandated some changes in the support we provide. So, creating that environment, and that's what I will talk about in a second, is where younger research universities have an advantage, precisely because they can still change their structures and their processes to adapt to changes in the broader context in which they have to operate. If you look at that context, what do you find? Well, we're going through a period of change in the way in which research is funded, not just in the UK, but globally. Many large funders are becoming more selective and more prescriptive in how they fund research. And that's a trend that has been going on for several years. In the UK, for instance, all the national research councils have identified clear strategic priorities, and funding will be concentrated in those areas. Funding from other government bodies, from charitable organizations, also tends to be targeted towards specific priorities, themes, or initiatives. Therefore, if we look across our main sources of research income, we find ourselves in a marketplace that is becoming more competitive, and at the same time with an increasingly well-defined, and focused demand side. That's what's happening around us. So the question is, how do you respond to that? Well, in York, we're doing a lot of work on trying to understand what our real research strengths are. Because, as I said, we have 28 departments. We are a comprehensive university. We're trying to understand where our strengths are, where we can have most impact, what is different and distinctive about our work. And we expect that a small number of interdisciplinary themes will come out of that work. And those themes will shape our future direction, and they will establish our future academic reputation. So the research themes we will identify will serve a very clear strategic purpose. Many of the priorities of the funding bodies are multi- or interdisciplinary. Think about areas such as food security, climate change, healthcare technology, and so forth. These are broad areas with potentially huge and significant societal impact. Now, because most of our research, although we think we're very good at doing interdisciplinary work at York, because most of the research still resides within the core disciplines, as it does in almost every university, I'm sure, it is difficult to have a clear understanding of our capabilities in relation to those broad overarching themes. In an environment where so many of the strategic priorities cut across disciplines, we should really understand very precisely what we have to offer in relation to those priorities. And then if we have that understanding, we can try to optimize our alignment with what the funding bodies want. So the research themes that we will hopefully be able to identify aim to create a structure for parts of our research offering. A structure that is largely independent from our existing structures, but that gives us focus. And each of these themes will represent an area that is of key strategic importance to us. Areas in which we can find, or have the intention at least, to create real strength and significant mass and volume. So they should also give our multidisciplinary research and our strengths in multidisciplinary research clear identity, and that will facilitate external communication as well. They are vehicles for communication. They should also make it clear that we are well prepared for multidisciplinary projects in particular areas, and they should provide really authoritative communication lines about those priority themes. And for internal purposes, they will show how and where our priority areas are embedded within the institution. And that will help us overcome some of the internal obstacles that arise from our existing structure, obstacles that might make interdisciplinary working more difficult. So that's how we are actively shaping our research capability. And we are in quite a fortunate position to be able to do this work, I think. Because York is a university with a very broad disciplinary base. We have 28 departments and research centers covering the sciences, the social sciences, and the arts. So that strength across the board really enables us to create the sort of environment for interdisciplinary work that can feed off that wealth of research capability across a broad institution. So it allows us, we hope, to create the sort of environment for interdisciplinary work that is necessary for a young, dynamic university to establish itself among the world's leading universities. And York, of course, is not alone in having that matrix of academic strength and structural adaptability. If we think of the other great universities founded in the 20th century, Chinese University of Hong Kong, University of California, San Diego, Aarhus, KAIST, many others, then you see a genre of institutions, I think, which are able to seize opportunities to do brilliant research and collaborate quite easily and naturally and successfully with each other because they share that outlook. So for instance, with Aarhus, we have a partnership around global collaboration in digital heritage. We work on the recycling of liquid crystals with KAIST and industrial partners, and we also work with a range of young Brazilian universities on biofuels. Our work on prevention of non-communicable diseases in early life is done jointly with the young universities of Bergen, Western Australia, Alberta, Chinese University of Hong Kong. But of course, we don't just work with young universities, we also have excellent collaborative projects with very prestigious ancient partners as well. So we're working with Peking University in art history and philosophy, with Chicago in mental health, with Nanjing in spintronics, and so forth. As you would expect in a research active top university, the list is almost endless. We also work extensively with other major organizations, such as the Wellcome Trust, Tate Galleries and Curatorship, a range of industrial partners in healthcare and so forth. Now, so finding ways to encourage and support partnerships in research is another key aim of the emerging research strategy. So the strategy has two underpinning strands. One is to identify thematic priority areas, and the second is to think about how we can support collaborative research in those areas, not just within the institution, but beyond. So, in summary, I would say that the crucial advantage that York now has, now it's 51, together with other universities that were founded in the 20th century, is that we are still young enough to adapt, I hope, but we're also old enough to be world-class. So informality, flexibility, a global mindset, a real concentration on the fundamentals of research and teaching are some of the characteristics that we think have made our university successful, together with a real willingness to work with others on the world's biggest challenges. So, and I hope that that shared sense of purpose that young universities have will see greater cooperation and attract the next generation of great scientists and scholars to our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're mourning your loss at 51, but please, there's a place for others to come in. So can we explore with Koen now some questions about particularly that research strategy for becoming a world-class institution? So I'm sure there are questions from the floor. So if you can put your hand up and do that funny about turn to the camera, say who you are, ask your question. Phil is going to kick us off. Phil. Don't forget to turn around.
Hi. Hello, I'm Phil Beatty from Times Higher Education, in case you didn't already know. I'm quite interested in this notion of freedom. You know, we hear a lot about the great universities, you know, find the right people and leave them alone, give them lots of money and freedom. Obviously, the climate doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily conducive to that, and sometimes rankings play their role in, you know, sort of driving people with metrics. But I'd quite like to explore this idea of how you get the balance right. If you are going to gather around key themes in terms of research and you want to promote interdisciplinarity, how much should it be driven from the top? I mean, obviously it's going to come organically from your own internal reviews and where your strengths already exist. But how much do you think you need to impose it top down and say, we need to do more here and you should collaborate with this institution or this researcher? And how much do you leave it to the organic, on-the-ground process?
I think that's a very good question. I have a very strong view that we should leave this to a bottom-up process. I don't think it is possible, really, from a limited understanding of disciplines, because you are really talking about a wide span of disciplines in all these cases, to decide in a directive manner what partnerships we should create and how, you know, they should then produce a research priority theme. What you can do in a top-down manner, though, is indicate what you think the parameters are that these research themes or strategic priorities should sort of be established within, what an acceptable range is. And if you do that, then you really come to a few principles that I think will sort of naturally lead to their definition. That's what I hope. One is that they should reflect real institutional strengths. So they should not be so narrow that only a small community of researchers can take part in them. Secondly, they should create opportunities that we didn't have before because they align us with funding priorities in ways that were either invisible or not understood before. So those two are important. And the third is that they should be designed in such a way that they invite even individuals in a university who at first glance don't think they could work around a particular theme, to just think about how they can contribute to that theme in an original way. And if you do that well, then you've got a recipe for amazing drive and innovation, I think. If you can get people from arts and humanities, say, to think about the contribution they can make to food security or water security, you might come up with some incredibly innovative and creative thinking that you would not have seen if you didn't pull them out of their core silos by giving them that opportunity. The fact still remains that some people will feel excluded because their research really does not fit. And that's fine. You just have to make sure in a comprehensive university that you keep supporting those people as well. But they will have to understand as well that if it comes to making institutional decisions about internal funding priorities and so forth, that we might emphasize the strategic priority themes.
Other hands up. Yes, here. Just wait for the microphone, would you? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Olufunke Fontino, Georgia College and State University in Georgia. My question is a follow-up to what you just asked. Do you use cluster hiring as a way of promoting some of this research initiative you talked about? By cluster hiring, I mean faculty who have similar or related interests that can come together and address specific research interests from a multidisciplinary perspective.
Yes. The answer is no, we don't do that. Mainly because we're not at that stage yet. I've only been at York for 4 months. The question has been put to the university. Now it's up to the university to sort of take it away and produce the answer. Whether there will be opportunities to apply the strategy that you described will entirely depend, I think, on the kind of themes that emerge and on the opportunities that we can create. We won't be going around aggressively trying to acquire other universities' research groups. That's not the idea. This is mainly about giving what is there already focus. And if that then becomes attractive to very strong groups and teams from outside, then of course that's terrific. But it's not really intended as a recruitment vehicle in the first instance. It is there to give focus on what we have already and to allow that to grow in a natural way.
Thank you. Jukka Mönkkönen from the University of Eastern Finland. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. I checked your research plan from the internet and tried to find out what are the real strengths or research areas. Have you identified them? Because I didn't find them in your documents. So have you identified, have you spelled them out to your own university, or how do you scope with these strengths and these areas?
I have identified them, of course. I think I know what they could be, but I haven't told anybody. I have deliberately not told anybody. And I'm doing this particular strand of the strategy with my pro-vice-chancellor for research, who I know has also identified areas herself. She says so, and she's very good at doing this, but we haven't even discussed them between us, because we really want this to be a bottom-up process. We really want to see if the academic community that we have will be capable of actually shaping themselves. If they do that, and they do it successfully, the support you will get for these teams is going to be incomparably better than if you even indicate that they should be thinking in a certain direction. That can be enough to distort this process. So I don't want to do it.
Yeah, that was the interesting point, that you actually the bottom-up process. We just actually did it 1 month ago. We just published our new strategy in a very university which is pretty much similar to your university in size and in multidisciplinary. And we have actually exactly the same approach to this, but that process was very interesting because that was partially a mixture of top-down and bottom-up
Yes.
process. And that's why I was so curious, how you are going to do it. And
Well, the top-down elements don't just come from me. They come from the funders. They come from the Research Council's strategic priorities. People know what they are. They know what kind of questions they're seeking to align themselves with.
But still, I think it's good to be done together. I mean, together with the vice-chancellors and deans, and also, but most importantly, with the researchers and the research groups.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other comments, questions? Yes, just here at the front, Claire. Or Simon. Just, thank you. Great.
Arun Sharma from Koen University of Technology. Thank you for the presentation. You did mention that you are going through this process. Have you set out parameters? Suppose what you think and your PVC research thinks and what bottom-up comes out. How do you disambiguate and then come up with an answer? That's my first question. The second is, do you foresee any structural changes resulting from your analysis and what you come up with? And the third question is, what incentives you have in mind to align the entire university towards these new strengths that you have identified?
Great questions.
Very sharp questions because they summarize sort of the three headings of my underpinning elements of the strategy. So it's the answer to the first question is that I have drafted a document, which is the university strategy, which sets out broadly what this new thematic structure is aiming to achieve. And that will be part of the consultation process that we're now going to launch later in May. So people will see that, and that will sort of set the context within which they can seek an answer. So that's quite clear. I believe our structures might well have to change. The university is set up in such a way that there are a large number of departments, and there is very little structure above departments. So every department has a very short communication line with the center, which works very well. But it's just quite possible that it creates obstacles that won't allow us to work in this hopefully new way that we're going to create. If that happens, then we really have to think about whether we should do something with that departmental structure and perhaps think about, creating a matrix of groupings that has departments in this way and the themes in that way. See how you allocate resources between those two axes. Incentives are a very, very important part of this. What we envisage will happen is that there will be natural incentivization that comes from the fact that the themes we identify will be priorities for the university. So if there is bump prime funding available to the university, that is where we would prefer to invest it. If there is opportunity for matching funding contributions from the university, they would hopefully be aligned with what we see as our most important priorities. So there will be funding streams, and not necessarily large ones, but there will be funding streams associated with alignment with those research themes. And I think that is sufficient. Just giving the researchers the opportunity to sort of explore opportunities on the back of that funding could be sufficient to make them think really hard about what the opportunities are. But again, the question is asked in the consultation document. There is a question about creating the right incentives to encourage people to engage with it, with the new structure once we have it, and to make sure that it becomes a success. That's an open question.
Thank you. Question here.
Bolaji Aluko, Federal University of Twoke. Professor Lambert, it looks as if you are upgrading from a new university to an old university through your research strategy. But for an entirely new university, it looks as if research will cost the most amount of money compared with, say, teaching and so on. How much more money do you have to do what you are about to do?
That is a very good question. Because, there are if you configure your research in a particular way, then the more you grow it, the more it costs you. That is the reality. There are the way in which costs of research are recovered is simply such that in some areas, growth will have to be matched by income generation elsewhere. So you point right at the heart of that dilemma. How do you underpin research growth if you know that that will not necessarily generate additional income for you, and you will have to grow other activities to underpin research, with the risk that those activities then detract from your research mission? And finding that balance, and it's essentially a balance between research and teaching, because teaching is what generates predictable, reliable income for universities, at least in the British system, where fees are the main source of income for most universities now. Finding that balance between those two activities is part of the question that every strong university now faces. I think what York has managed to do in the past, as I said, is strike that balance just right. So they are very good at teaching and very good at research. They can do them both in remarkable harmony. And the question then is, if you grow and if you develop further and you realign your research in particular ways, can you maintain that harmony? And I think it's going to be a challenge to the university and to me, to see if we'll be able to do that over a period of years. It's a very valid point. It's a very good point, and a difficult one.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I think if we can just express our thanks to you for sharing some of that journey with us. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Lamberts.
Thank you.